Good evening, everybody. Sometimes when we have a lot of students in the crowd, I try and gauge, sort of how quickly everybody quiets down when somebody stands behind this lectern. It's actually pretty impressive how quick it is when we have less students too. So welcome. Thank you for coming to tonight's Falmouth Forum. This is a tradition that the MBL has been cultivating for about 30 years now. And that really was started by what is now known as the Friends of the MBL. The Friends of the MBL provide a connection to the community and a lot of the funding that enables these talks to happen, whether it's about science, culture, the natural environment, and many other issues that are relevant to us as people and our local community. So thank you for coming. And I do want to let you know that the Friends of the MBL, you may have seen there's a welcome desk outside that gives you the opportunity to support the MBL and support the Falmouth Forum. The Friends have kicked off a $100,000 fundraising drive, and they're aiming to raise that money by next summer so that we can expand the types of offerings that we put in this auditorium for the community's benefit. And so I'm happy to announce and to encourage you to join that effort because we do have a member of our community and a friend of the MBL who's put forth a $25,000 challenge gift to encourage folks to join that effort. So please consider that on the way out. There's an opportunity to pick up an envelope or make a gift, or you can do so online. I would be remiss, this isn't in my prepared remarks, but you may have noticed in the list of speakers this year that Cokie Roberts was going to join us this year. We were really excited about that and very sad. It was not just a loss, obviously, for our community and this series, but for the country. And in recognition of that, I just want to let you know that we are working to honor Cokie's memory and the message that she was going to bring to us by finding a speaker or speakers who might deliver a similar message and help to provoke the same kinds of conversations and exchanges that she would have when she was here. Finally, I have the mundane task of asking you to, well, first be aware that this is both simulcast and recorded, and most importantly, to make sure that your personal communication devices of whatever sort are silenced so that our speaker can deliver his compelling talk this evening. And with that, welcome Mike Fishbein, who's a member of the Friends of the MBL board, to introduce our speaker this evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sebastian. So first I want to say I'm happy to welcome you to the 2019-2020 Falmouth Forum Series. We've been doing this now for 30 years, bringing diverse and interesting programs to Woods Hole. And I want to really give a special thanks to the MBL for its tremendous support for this program. And I really can't say really enough about the MBL, the important role that it plays in our local community, but also globally. So as a member of the Falmouth Forum Committee of the Friends of the MBL Board, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight Speaker Dr. Gregory Skomal. He asked me to keep this short, so I'll do my best. So, I really consider myself quite lucky to be living in Woods Hole and Falmouth, all the diverse, wildlife and everything. And about 7 years ago, I also had a bit of luck in that I was introduced to IFAW, the International Fund for Animal Welfare, or many people know it as the Dolphin Rescue Group. And that experience has introduced me to all kinds of marine wildlife, and particularly whales, all kinds, minke, fin, porpoises, dolphins, even some turtles, loggerheads, leatherbacks, and a lot of seals, so many seals. And maybe because of the seals, Cape Cod has had another visitor, as we all know, the great white shark. And that's why we're here tonight. So there's really no place else in the world that has the environment that we have on Cape Cod, where there are so many great white sharks that aggregate in one place. And also, unfortunately, there's no place else in the world where we have so many great white sharks that are living amongst bathers. And as we all know, there have been over the last several years 3 attacks on swimmers, one of which was fatal. And that, if you think about that number, it's particularly concerning when you think that worldwide there are only 6 fatal shark attacks in the world. So one of those happened on Cape Cod. So it's important really for us as a community to develop some strategies for dealing with this issue of bathers intermingling with great white sharks. And I think that whatever strategies are developed, it's going to be incumbent on us to really understand the behavior of great white sharks. How do they hunt? What motivates them to attack a seal? How do they distinguish seals from people, et cetera, et cetera? And I think there's really nobody else in the world who's advanced this science more than Dr. Gregory Skomal. So Dr. Skomal is an accomplished marine biologist, underwater explorer, photographer, and author. He's been a fisheries scientist with the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries since 1987 and currently heads up the Massachusetts Shark Research Program. He's also an adjunct faculty at the University of Massachusetts School of Marine Sciences and Technology and an adjunct scientist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. He holds a master's degree from the University of Rhode Island and a PhD from Boston University. For more than 35 years, Greg has been actively involved in the study of sharks. His shark research has spanned the globe, from the frigid waters of the Arctic Circle to coral reefs in the tropical Central Pacific. Much of his current research centers on the use of acoustic telemetry and satellite-based tagging technology to study the ecology and behavior of sharks. Greg has written dozens of scientific research papers and has appeared on National Geographic, the Discovery Channel, BBC, and numerous television networks. Last week, his research was featured on a segment of 60 Minutes. His most recent book, The Shark Handbook, is a must-buy for all shark enthusiasts. He's a Boston Sea Rover and a member of the Explorers Club, and his home and laboratory are on the south coast of Massachusetts. So please join me in welcoming tonight's Falmouth Forum speaker, Dr. Gregory Skomal.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it. That was awesome. Thank you, Michael. It's great to be back in Lilly. It's been a while since I've been here. I actually was a student at the BU Marine Program, Boston University Marine Program, which was centered in Woods Hole many, many years ago. And my last talk here was my thesis defense. So if I'm a little nervous, it's because I think people are going to scrutinize everything I'm going to say, which you're going to do anyway. But it's great to be back. I lived on the vineyard for many, many years before we kicked off a lot of this white shark work, and I spent a lot of time in Woods Hole, not only commuting to and from the vineyard, but also getting my PhD and interacting with this incredible scientific community that we have here, and we're so lucky to have here in Massachusetts, right here in Woods Hole. I want to thank the Friends for inviting me and sponsoring me be here. It's exciting. I don't get a chance. A lot of my talks are out on the Outer Cape or other places far away, and it's great to be back in Falmouth area talking about white sharks. And I'm sure you guys are thinking about white sharks to some extent, and maybe not so much as the people living in Orleans and Truro and Wellfleet. But it certainly is on everybody's brain. So what I want to do is give you a sense of what we're doing, the direction our research is going in, what we've accomplished to date, the new technologies that we're using to give you, a sense of what we're trying to achieve on Cape Cod and have been trying to achieve over the years. It's been an incredibly busy summer. We've been on the water quite a bit. We've tagged quite a few sharks, but almost Everything I talked about tonight will not be related to this summer because we are still actively in the field. We'll be in the field for the next month. And much of the data that we've collected this year is sitting, stored, archived, waiting for us to get a solid look at it starting in November and into the winter months. That's why I like seasons. You know, it gets me out of the field and gets us to do some of the really fun stuff. I want to give you a little bit about my background. You know, a lot of people associate me now, particularly in Cape Cod, maybe at other parts, with white sharks. But white sharks are not a species I didn't really start focusing on until, you know, recent years. A lot of my work, and I started studying sharks, started getting paid actually to study sharks way back in 1983. I'm on the far left here in this photograph dating back then. And a lot of my work back then really was traditional fisheries biology work, where everything I did was from learning from dead fish. It wasn't until technology exploded over the last 20 years that we started using some of the new techniques to look at the movement ecology and behavior of these species at incredible resolution and incredible scales. But a lot of my work back in those days was on dead fish. And you can learn a lot from a dead fish. Just ask any traditional fisheries biologist, you know, and some of the stuff that we learned was, you know, quite obvious. If you want to know what a fish eats, you look in its stomach. And some of it wasn't so obvious. In the case of sharks, if you take a section of its backbone and you slice the backbone and stain the rings, you can count the rings and come up with an age estimate. So my master's degree back in those days was on aging blue sharks. And so I spent all my time cutting open blue sharks, taking a section of the backbone, trying to get a sense of their age by counting these rings on, like trees, rings on trees, and getting and modeling its growth rate and its longevity. So, which is really classic fisheries biology. And it wasn't really until the later years that we started using these newer techniques that became available to us. So much of my research, and I didn't come to work for the Division of Marine Fisheries until 1987, 4 years after this photo was taken. And a lot of my work in those years was focused on other species of sharks. The most abundant large shark that we have off our coastline is the one featured in the center of this photograph that I took of a blue shark. But I was working on a variety of species, whether it be, you know, porbeagle sharks that you see pictured below, basking sharks. I did some work up in the Arctic Circle on Greenland sharks, sand tigers, which are an estuarine inhabitant during our summers here, smooth dogfish, of course, Mostellus species, mako sharks. So a lot of my work, and you don't see pictured here, white sharks, because by far, you know, we were focusing on those species that were typically encountered by recreational and commercial fishermen off our coastline. This particular species here is the gray reef shark, and that's some of the research I did when I was at, you know, MBL through the BU Marine program. Working with Phil Lobel on gray reef sharks, and those were that was work we did out in the Central Pacific. So I've had great opportunity over the years to work on a variety of shark species, looking at various aspects of their natural history, their physiology, and their behavior. But the white shark stuff didn't take off until, you know, honestly, you know, the mid-2000s, and so. In those early years, though, because I was so good at cutting up dead fish, when white sharks came in, you know, I would have the opportunity, scientists would have the opportunity to dissect white sharks. It's not like we didn't see white sharks, we just didn't see a lot of them. And most of the ones that we did see were captured by recreational or commercial fishermen and brought to us, or we would go to them to see these sharks. So this is a really small white shark that we dissected. This was back in the late 80s. And this is about the size we think they're born. And this is a really big white shark that we dissected. Same scientist, different shark, obviously. But this is, and what we would try to do is just cobble together various pieces of the puzzle to get a sense of the natural history of this species. But we didn't learn anything about its natural ecology and its behavior because we couldn't go out and predictably find white sharks. So I'm going to actually show you a typical necropsy of a white shark. So it's actually not as bad as you think, because I'm going to speed it right up. But every now and then I'll go back in time and cut up a white shark. Certainly if one strands on a beach, and that does happen every now and then on Cape Cod, or if a commercial fisherman inadvertently captures one and is so kind as to bring it in for us, we'll dissect it. Because you could still learn a lot from a dead fish. Longevity, growth rates, reproductive biology, you name it. So I'm going to show you this little video of a white shark that we dissected on Halloween a few years ago in Orleans. But like I said, I speed it up. And you know, because I work for the state, I certainly don't work this fast. And what's really cool about these kinds of opportunities is there are scientists from all over that come to do this with us. And by taking various tissue samples, we are learning an amazing amount of information about these fish. Whether it be, like I said, the stomach, the backbone, various other tissues to look at its reproductive biology. So every now and then I delve into going into these necropsies. And I think a lot of us who have studied biology over the last 30 or 40 years certainly can't get away from that, because we know the value of utilizing these fish, not just to eat, but also just to figure out how they live from day to day. But there's a lot that these necropsies don't tell us. And that's why we know so little about the basic movement ecology and the behavior of these animals over multiple scales, whether it be from day to day, month to month, or year to year. We really didn't know a lot about the white shark because we couldn't go out and predictably find them. How many people in this room remember this incident? You don't have to be that old to remember this incident, because it really kicked off part of my career. It really was my introduction to white sharks. And this is Naushon Island, place known as the West Gutter, where a white shark inadvertently swam into a small estuary, and we tagged it, and it stayed for 2 weeks. And the Boston Globe just did a story on this yesterday, recounting this incredible event. Which I'm not going to go into. I have a whole talk about this, and someday when I go retro, I'm going to tell this talk, because it's back from 2004. But it's about how we had to get this shark out of the pond. And I'm going to boil it down to just a small paragraph and say that we did get the shark out of the pond. It took us 2 weeks to do it. It was politically charged atmosphere. We were very excited because if you look closely, even at this photo, you can barely see a tiny tag that I put on it, which was this really sophisticated electronic tag, which we use routinely now, but it was relatively new in those days. And I was going to be the first person to put one of these tags on these sharks and learn about what they do when they migrate throughout the Atlantic Ocean. I was all excited. And after we got the shark out of the pond, literally about 45 minutes after we got out of the pond, the tag came off. So for 2 weeks, I'm watching this shark swimming around with this tag thinking, this is going to be great. And of course, all I learned is that the shark was trapped in a pond for 2 weeks. But that really kicked things off, and it gave us a sense of what was beginning to happen in Cape Cod. And we were paying attention at a superficial level, and we started to drill down deeper, saying, why would this shark here? Why was it close to shore? And we started investigating all these incidents of seals on the beach being bitten by white sharks. And we started to take a look at, okay, what's a consistent pattern that we see globally with white sharks? Because we know that there are these hotspots that exist around the world where filmmakers and scientists and divers, people with a lot of extra money, can go and dive with white sharks, take pictures like this, and experience the white sharks. And what is the common thread among these areas? And of course, the common thread is food that looks like this, right? Because white sharks have this really interesting natural history where small white sharks eat fish and big white sharks, as they go through puberty, if you will, get to the stage where they want to eat bigger things. You know, they don't want to chase around small fish. They want to eat pinnipeds. They want to scavenge whales, and they're really well adapted to doing that. And so global hotspots have big pinniped populations, seals and sea lions, that overlap with the distribution of the white shark in some time and space. And there are times of the year where white sharks show up at these areas to take advantage of this incredibly robust food resource. And you know what? That's exactly what is happening in Cape Cod. And you all know it. We talk about it all the time in recent years, because the gray seal population, and all seal populations in general in the northeastern U.S., are rebounding after we put protections in place in 1972 with the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So the average, and I have these great conversations with folks all the time on the Cape about, you know, particularly older folks who say, you know, when I was a kid, I never saw seals. And I said, because you're not old enough. You know, seals were here in huge numbers, but we started hitting them really, really a long time ago, several hundred years ago when we first settled these areas. And we knocked them down very, very quickly because they're not hard to harvest. And so we drove them to the brink of extinction when, with the passage of the act in '72, we have now afforded them almost 50 years of protection. And so what was once an area totally devoid of seals 40 years ago now looks like this. And I'll tell you, you know, it is a conservation success story, and we have these debates through the newspapers and other media, and I have it on my phone every day with various other entities. But it is a conservation success story because the Marine Mammal Protection Act is working, and the populations are now recolonizing and coming back to the northeastern United States and Canada. But when you open up a restaurant that looks like that, the critters in the gray suits are going to show up. And that's exactly what is happening, because for every predator or mesopredator, there's going to be another predator of that predator. And that's exactly what is happening. The white sharks have taken notice of this incredible food resource, and they are here to forage in this habitat like in any other white shark hotspot around the world. So it's no real, you know, it's a very simple equation. It's cause and effect. It's what's happening. And it's what's to be expected to happen in a natural, well-balanced ecosystem. So every day this plays out off the coast of Cape Cod, where there are big haul-outs of seals. You know, shark going after seal. Shark's not mad at the seal. The shark's not mad at people. It's not mad at us. It's not angry. It's not aggressive. It just wants to eat. And this is what plays out every day. Now, this is a smart seal. This seal figured out that if I go into shallow water, the big fish can't follow me. All right? Not so much for this seal. Okay? So every day this is happening, but remarkably, we don't see it every day because, no, we're not on the water every day, but we're on the water 30, 40, 50 times a year. And it's amazing how little we see this play out. And for us, you know, we're absorbing these observations and try to get a sense of where, when, and how do these white sharks attack and kill these seals. But it's happening, we know, in waters that are very close to the shoreline. Okay, so you could see the beach is just up there in the left-hand corner of this photograph. So I'm going to show you a video of this drama that we've photographed one day, and I have to put my glasses on, excuse me. I'm finding I need these things more and more. And this is a wonderful, wonderfully choreographed video put together by a friend of mine. You'll see a lot more of our tagging boat. There was a time we used to use grad students to hold the cameras. Thank God for the GoPro, right? We went through grad students quite a bit back then, but you see the shark. It's what it's targeting is that rich blubber layer that these animals have. It's loaded with fat. It's loaded with energy, and the sharks target these seals because they have the capacity to kill them. They're powerful. They're strong. They're well adapted to feeding on them, and it's an incredibly rich food resource. So it's energetically profitable for the sharks to target these seals. Now, of course, the seals are close to the beach. And this is an incredible sequence that I go back to because, you know, when we're out on the water, we're always trying to observe, get natural observations of these animals feeding on seals. And this particular day that we were out a few years ago, we were called over by our spotter pilot. And all of these photos are taken by a pilot named Wayne Davis, who's not only really, really good at finding fish for us, but also an incredible photographer. And so Wayne called us over and said, I've got this shark that's swimming erratically back and forth in the water, you know, seemingly frustrated. And I'm going, okay, this is interesting. I love these kinds of descriptions. But we got over there and we noticed, okay, there's a whole bunch of seals that figured out that there's something in the water that wants to eat them. And those are the ones that are very, very close to the beach. And we typically see this happen as we get into July of each year. The seals figure out, okay, there's a top predator out there. We know that this is all about, we're gonna stay close to the shore. And then you have this other seal that came out from underneath our boat, which you see pictured here to the right. You see the seal right next to the shark. And this particular seal didn't apparently get the text that day that there's a shark trying to eat us. And so this moment that this photo was taken, the seal is looking at the shark and the shark is looking at the seal. And I bet you everybody in this room is gonna think, okay, this seal doesn't have a chance, right? Well, the next photo I'm gonna show you, and you can see me on the pulpit of this boat with a camera in my hand. The next photo I'm gonna show you is the shark and the seal, what happened moments later. The seal realized it had very few options other than to go straight up into the air. And the shark followed it. So what you're looking at here is the body of the seal is right here and the shark is right there and the mouth of the shark is extended and the jaws are clenched, but it's missing the seal. It does not get the seal. So I'm going to show you what I saw from the pulpit of the boat that day and give you a sense of one of these observations. We get very rare observations of sharks breaching, and this is one of those rare observations. Now I'm going to slow it down. People like me in the room say, what just happened? I'm going to slow that down so you get a sense of that seal going straight out of the water, the shark coming after it, and missing. Seal, of course, went on the beach and never went back in the water again. So we're trying to figure out, okay, how does this predator-prey dynamic work? And so I had a very interesting experience last year, 2018, when I felt like a seal. And some of you may have seen this on TV.
I think I see him there.
You may hear the voice of our spotter pilot calling down to me saying, Greg, there's a shark under the pulpit. And what I'm going to do is try to get a videotape of that shark. That's the first thing you do when we see these sharks. So watch below the pulpit.
Whoa! Holy crap!
And again, we're going to slow that down. And we're going to zoom in a little bit. And this is my impression of being a seal. The now world famous white shark shuffle that occurred. So why did that happen? You know, everyone asks me why did that happen? And of course, I don't know. You know, you can ask 100 scientists and no one can tell you exactly why that happened. And we're all going to put forth these hypotheses. But what it's doing right now is it's generating in all of you questions. You know, how does this predator-prey relationship really work? This is how close white sharks will get to the beach. All right, it's that close to seals. And if you swim off Cape Cod, you know you have no problem going into water that deep. This is what people do. So it's that overlap that Michael talked about when he introduced me between people and sharks and their prey seals that is creating issues for us. We all remember this photo just published a couple of weeks ago, right? It's an amazing photo because it captured the look on that surfer's face, as he looks back and that white shark swims right by him in Orleans. And this is happening every day. And that shark made a choice not to bite that person. That probably happens every day, all the time. That's what's going on. The shark is making a choice. They're incredibly focused on these seals, but occasionally they make mistakes. And the first mistake that's well documented in history was in 1936. This is the old New Bedford Times. A shark killed a swimmer in Buzzards Bay that year, a young man by the name of Troy, and Joseph Troy. And that occurred in Buzzards Bay. Nothing since then until 2012 when a swimmer was bitten off of Truro. And then in 2014, kayakers off Plymouth had their kayaks struck with such great force by a white shark, it knocked them into the water where they remained for 20 minutes waiting for help. And fortunately, the shark went away. Shortly after that, a few years later, paddleboard was bitten off Wellfleet in 2017. And all remember what happened in 2018 with Dr. Litton bitten off of Truro severely. And then, of course, Arthur Medici bitten and killed in 2018. So things are changing. What happened maybe 400 or 500 years ago with robust numbers of sharks and seals, there were no people. Now there are people. We diminished the sharks, we diminished the seals. People came in, we brought back the sharks and brought back the seals as mandated by law, and now this is happening. So as you can imagine, as you all know, you just pick up the paper every week throughout the summer. Cape Cod Times told me we're going to do a story about sharks every week. And I said, that's just great. I love that. That's going to be just wonderful for us. But this is what happens. The public is on edge. Everybody's thinking about it. Sharks are on the brain, and we're going to keep them on the brain. So from a scientific perspective, it got us thinking, okay, what can we do? Because I say it over and over again, but I'm a fisheries biologist, and typically the approach that we take is we will learn about these animals for sustainability, and we will put regulations in place such that we allow for populations to thrive and coexist. But now I'm suddenly thinking about public safety. What can we learn about these animals that will help us solve some of these issues? The probability of a shark attack is incredibly low. I mean, when the Cape Cod Times, when Doug Frazier calls me, he'll say, what do you tell people when they go to the beach? And I always say, drive safely. You got to drive safely, because the probability of you being killed in your car on the way to the beach in Cape Cod is orders of magnitude higher than being killed by a shark. But that doesn't get a lot of traction. It doesn't get a lot of there's 1,000 analogies. You've heard them all. I'm not going to go into them. But the bottom line is we do have the overlap between the sharks, their prey, the seals, and people. And it's an issue that we have to address. So from a scientific perspective, for me, it's trying to drill down deeper into this predatory behavior, which I've been alluding to with some of our observations. You would think that, Greg, you're on the water for the last 10 years. You must have seen 150 attacks of sharks on seals. And I'll tell you, no, I've only seen about 14, which is remarkable. Either I'm not there at the right place at the right time, or the sharks are not very good at it. But something's happening, and I'm not seeing it, because if I had 150 observations, I can tell you when, where, and how white sharks feed on seals, but I can't tell you that. Because a sample size of 13, as all you scientists in the room will tell you, that's not very good. I can't model that all that effectively and get it published. So the bottom line is we need to drill down deeper into this predatory behavior, because that is the key to figuring out whether or not human activities, sharks, seals, can coexist and overlap. So this talk now is going to talk about what we've been doing to try to get a sense, not relying solely on just seeing sharks attack seals, because that hasn't worked, but what are the technologies that we can use to answer this question? When, where, and how do white sharks hunt their prey? And so as you all know from watching TV, and you know we do a lot of tagging out here. And the thing we do is we try to take the least invasive approach to tagging these animals. We use a small intramuscular dart that's inserted at the base of the dorsal fin while the sharks are free swimming. We don't chum, we don't capture them, we don't drag them through the water, we don't take them out of the water, we don't put tail ropes on them. We don't think that's a good thing to do a mile off a public swimming beach. And whether or not it's over precautionary, I don't care. I just think it's the right approach to studying natural behavior. And so we take this approach by going to the shark instead of bringing the sharks to us. And so I'll show you a small video of us tagging a white shark. Basically, we heavily utilize Wayne Davis in his spotter plane. He sees a shark in a particular spot, calls down to the boat captain, John King, on the Aleutian Dream. John is up in the tower of the boat. We go to where Wayne sees the shark, a mile off Chatham, 100 feet off Chatham. We could be there in a very short period of time. He then puts me on top of the shark. The first thing I do is I will get video of that shark. I will document who that shark is. And we can really, it's quite amazing when it comes to white sharks. We're learning so much about their individual aspects. And one of them is we can tell white sharks apart by their various color patterns. Where the gray dorsal surface meets the white underbelly forms patterns that are almost like fingerprints. They have scarring patterns as well that we can tell individual sharks apart. Also, I can tell if they're male, female, we can get size estimates. So doing a couple of sweeps with the GoPro is the first thing we do. If the shark cooperates, we will then try to put a tag in it. And so this particular video I'm going to show you is us tagging a white shark that we had just gotten video from. It's swimming along the surface. And if you look, you could see the shark right here. Beautiful, crystal clear Cape Cod waters. And I've got the tagging pole in my hand. The tag is mounted to a needle on the end of that, a small intramuscular dart mounted on the needle that's tethered to the tag. And so the shark is just swimming along, and I can tell right now it's staying too deep. But what it does is that boat next to us kind of spooks the shark. It comes back toward me, and I go, oh, wait a minute, it's just come up. And I'm just going to pop the tag right there.
Nice job.
That's the tag put in the shark. You'll see the view of the camera that's mounted on the pole there. And this is an acoustic tag, and we're going to talk about these technologies next. That's the blue tag right there. The shark swims away. Now that tag, that acoustic tag will last for about 10 years. So not only are we tracking the movements of white sharks, but we're tracking the movements of individual white sharks to look for individual patterns from year to year to year to year. And what we're finding out, as you'll see shortly, is that there's remarkable diversity in individual patterns. And again, I fall back always on my traditional training as a fisheries biologist. You study codfish, this is what codfish do. You study striped bass, this is what they do. You study white sharks, and they all do different things, which makes it really hard to come up with predictable patterns. And so we've tagged over 200 sharks since 2009, most of them in the last 5 years. And we've used these 3 different technologies. And the first one, which I'll spend most of my time on, is the acoustic technology. And what's really amazing, acoustic technology is old technology. It's just a tag that emits a very high frequency ping. And one of the pioneers to use acoustic tags, did that right in this town at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution back in the 60s and 70s. His name was Frank Carey. I was really fortunate as a young student to meet and work with him. He built these tags in his lab, and those tags he'd put on swordfish and tuna and sharks, and he'd follow them on the order of hours to days to see what they did in 3-dimensional space. And the scientific community was absolutely marveled by this new information coming out from these tags. Fast forward, 30, 40 years, and now we're using these tags, the same technology, but they last for 9 and 10 years. And they tell us about these animals over much longer periods of time. But what's really cool is that stuff started right here in this town. And so acoustic tags are perfect for telling us where the sharks hang out, when they arrive, when they leave. And so it's really good for local questions. The satellite-based technology is typically what we use for broader scale questions. You know, where do they go when they leave? What do they do in three-dimensional space when they're not within the range of acoustic receivers? You know, broader scales. What do they do from year to year? And so over the course of the last 10 years, we've tagged over 200. And I'm going to show you a map now as to where we actually see white sharks on Cape Cod. I think people get surprised by this. Southern tip of Monomoy to Race Point. Okay, so now you're thinking, well, okay, I'm going to go swimming in Cape Cod Bay, right? Well, not so right, because every study has bounds and limitation generally associated with funding. And so our study area ends at these points. So you have the same questions I have, right? Okay, what the hell is going on in here? What's going on in here? But we have ways of looking at that. We have ways, and I'm going to go into those ways. We've expanded our work in 2019 to go into the Bay and get a better handle on what's going on in Cape Cod Bay. But most of our work has been tagging sharks along this outer cape. And the technology we're using is this acoustic technology. And the way these tags work, as I already said, is really quite simple. They emit a very high frequency sound that's picked up by a receiver. The receivers are about this big, right? And the value of this study, the utility of this study is only as good as your array of acoustic receivers. So what we've done is we've put acoustic receivers. It's taken us some time and cost and energy and collaboration to get these receivers out all over the state of Massachusetts so we can get a relative sense of where the sharks are going. And what's really been nice is we're partnering with a lot of towns. And I think that's pretty cool because, maybe 50 years ago or 45 years ago when the movie Jaws came out, towns didn't really want to talk about sharks in their waters, right? But almost every town that we work with, and we work with every town, is really excited about knowing whether sharks are in their waters. So we're able to put these acoustic receivers out. And the way that receivers work is the shark swims within generally 1 to 200 meters, depending on water conditions, depth. And the ping is picked up by the receiver. This is the hydrophone. The data from is logged in the receiver, date, time, but also which shark it is. Each shark has its own serial number. So the shark will emit, this is, for example, James. James was picked up Sunday at 2 o'clock. But we have to get the receivers back to download the data, and then we recreate where the sharks were. So as you can imagine, to answer some of the basic questions, we put them off of popular swimming beaches, we put them off of seal haul-outs, we put them in places that the towns are super interested in knowing whether white sharks are present. And the technology is incredibly useful because it will log these data over the course of a year to 2 years. So one of the big questions that I get immediately is, when are they here? Are they here year-round, Greg? Because the seals, they're here year-round. Are they here? When are they here? And acoustic data are wonderful to mine to get a sense of when the sharks are here. One of my favorite sharks, and give you a sense of how you can learn from a shark over multiple years, is Julia. Julia was tagged back in 2011 with one of these tags. Okay, that's a pretty long time ago. 14-foot female. This is her coming up to look at me after I tagged her. And I'm going to show you a little video of Julia and give you a sense of what we've been able to learn from her. And it goes to these very unique individual characteristics. This particular shark was back in 11. In 11, we weren't using the Aleutian Dream. We were using a professional harpoon vessel. So you'll see us on this professional harpoon vessel. That's the spotter plane up in the air. What's really cool about this is off of Orleans. So I'll give you a sense of how close we are to shore, how difficult it is to actually see these sharks. Julia is up in these shallow waters here, just moving along the shoreline, hunting for seals. We're going to throw the GoPro in the water, and you'll get a much better look at Julia. There she is. You can barely make out that shadow of her. We'll throw that in the water. What was remarkable about Julia, as it is for a lot of different sharks, is Julia loved to come back Memorial Day weekend. Plus or minus a few days. But that's really good timing. Not only are you migrating thousands of kilometers away, and there's her tag, but you're coming, you're swimming back on a timetable. I mean, I can do that in my car pretty effectively, more or less, but imagine that. So she came back on or about Memorial Day weekend, and we always joked about her having a great Orleans rental. But she loves to hang out and still hangs out in Orleans, comes back each and every year. But it's remarkable the timing of this animal, because we can look at other sharks and see very different patterns. Well, this is an August shark. This is a September shark. And a lot of sharks we're starting to figure out is some are transient. They use Cape Cod as like a Burger King on I-95. They'll pull over, grab a snack, feed get out of town and go up to Maine and hang out for the season. Some of them get a hotel room. They get a beachside rental. They stay there for the season, whether it be a month, 2 months, 3 months, because they're having incredible success feeding on these seals. You're not going to challenge yourself by hanging out in shallow water as a 2,000-pound fish unless it's energetically profitable. So that's a great example. So when are these sharks here? And the surfers love the answer to this question. No big numbers in May. Julia's one of the few sharks that showed up as early as Memorial Day. Most of them trickle in June. July tends to ramp up depending on water temperatures, because their movements are mediated by water temperature. But August, September, October. So I think it was a big surprise to the public last year when these shark bites occurred after the kids went back to school, right? Well, the kids are back in school, the sharks left. No, it doesn't work that way, because there's plenty of seals around, and there's ample, perfect, ideal water temperatures. And so the sharks are here through September and October, and they're here, right now. Right now. It's only early October. They're going to be here until early November. We're going to get a bunch of cooling down events that occur. Water temperatures will drop fairly precipitously in the first 2 weeks of November on the average year, and the sharks will, for the most part, move out. A few will stick around, maybe a handful will stick around until mid-December, and then they're gone. They're absolutely out of here. So we've nailed down, using this technology, a very simple seasonality to the presence of these animals, and this is consistent from year to year. So we know when they're here, so where do they spend their time? So this goes to the acoustic receivers that we've spread out all over the state. Now, all of you are going to think right now these are white sharks. They're not. These are not white sharks. Who thought these were white sharks? Be honest. These are our acoustic receivers, all right? These are the receivers that we put out each and every year working with various towns. Some of these receivers, you say, wow, why is it out there? We are studying codfish, striped bass, sturgeon, a variety of other species in my agency. So these receivers, you may be tagging codfish, but these receivers will also pick up white sharks, okay? The technology is seamless. It's used by researchers all over the country, all over the world. And what's wonderful is they will pick up all the various species that are tagged with this technology. So these are the receivers that we've had out over the years since we started in 2012. And admittedly, it has expanded. If I were to show you the receivers in 2012, you would have seen 6, okay? Now there's well over 100 that we've put out. And anytime you put equipment in the water, it requires high maintenance, and it's a pain. Then this next slide is going to give you a sense of where the sharks are detected on this array, okay? So if there is a dot in this next slide, the dot is going to be where a receiver is, and the size of the dot is going to be proportional to the number of sharks that are detected there, all right? So this is where the sharks spend their time. And there are a couple of patterns that jump out at us, right? Nantucket Sound, Buzzards Bay, virtually devoid of sharks. The detections we get in Nantucket Sound, Vineyard Sound, are largely late in the season, typically September, October, as sharks begin to leave the area. All right, Buzzards Bay, although we have extensive coverage of receivers in the bay, we do not see the sharks enter Buzzards Bay, even though this is where Joseph Troy was killed back in 1936. As we move our way south from Boston, we can see the number of white sharks is increasing, but these are largely, because they're such small dots, transient animals. They're just moving through, all right? As we get to the outer Cape, and of course the western side of the upper Cape, of the lower Cape, we can see that the numbers of white sharks increase. And the colors are just different coding schemes that we use to differentiate between years. It's not a big deal for tonight. Just look at the size of but this is where the seals are, right? This is where the seals are. If we were to plot out where all the people were, and if the sharks were into eating people, we'd have big dots all over the place. But the truth of the matter is the sharks are basically going where the seals are. And you could say, okay, so if I'm managing these outer Cape beaches, perhaps Cape Cod Bay, I'm going to be particularly concerned about the presence of these animals. But it gives us a relative sense of where the sharks are. You know, all of our effort, you will recall, was on the outer Cape, but we can use this technology to see where the sharks are going. It's effort-independent technology that allows us to look at where they are in a relative sense around other parts of the Cape. And some of you in the room are looking, okay, what about Woods Hole? And you could see even the Noshawn shark isn't there. There's not many animals that go to Noshawn Island at this stage, at least the tagged animals. And so you say, okay, well, what proportion of the population have you tagged? And we don't know that yet, but we're working on it. But 200 animals is a fairly sufficient sample size. So just to give you a sense of some of the local daily movements of these sharks, we've done this small graphic of the Orleans, Chatham, Monomoy area. And what you see here on the right side of the screen are the various names of the sharks as they come and go from this receiver array. The white dots are the acoustic receivers in this area. And this is just a week back in 2015 of various sharks moving back and forth throughout this area, you know? And you say to yourself, okay, they're spending quite a bit of time close to shore. They're spending time in that receiver array. But I can tell you they're not spending all their time in that receiver array. If I had an unlimited budget with unlimited number of people working for me, I'd have 1,000 receivers out, but I don't. You could see they're spread out over a fairly good distance. But it gives you a sense of the residency of these individual sharks. These are the resident sharks that are coming here each year. So we're always looking for patterns in this behavior. You know, trying to determine, is there a certain tide? Is there a certain time of day that the sharks are moving close to shore to feed on these seals? So far, nothing has been obvious. Nothing has been statistically valid because there's so much variability, you know, within individuals, between individuals in this particular group that we're tagging. Your other question is going to be, you know, those data are really cool. We think it's great you're learning from them, Greg, but you're collecting those receivers once a year, and all the data you share with us are kind of old. You know, you get them months later. What about some kind of system that we could put out there that'll tell us when a shark swims within range of a swimming beach? And that's exactly the technology you see right here. This is a real-time acoustic receiver. What we've done is we're testing it this year, 2019. We've put out a number of these to get a sense and to give the beach managers a sense in real time how often a tagged shark is within the range of their swimming beaches. And so this is off of, at this time it was off of Newcomb Hollow Beach, where Arthur was killed last year. It is a receiver that when the shark swims within about 100 to 200 meters of the receiver, it will detect the shark and let the night lifeguards know that are on the beach that there is a shark swimming within range of that receiver. And this sounds like a wonderful early warning system, doesn't it? Except as much as I'd love to say I've tagged every single shark out there, I haven't. I'd like to, but I don't know if that'll ever happen. And so there's this, again, we're always worried about this false sense of security that we don't want to give the general public. Instead, we're using these data sets to give the beach managers a sense of how frequently a tagged shark comes close to the beach, and what they're finding out is almost all the time there's a tagged shark around these beaches. And it allows them to develop strategies for when they want to clear the water, close the beach, how they want to adapt to the presence of these animals. So it's allowing them to develop response schemes relative to the presence of these sharks. So we are testing this technology, and we hope to deploy a few more of those next year.
How many do you have out?
We have we had 2 of those out this year. The reason I don't have 100 of those out this year or any other year is because the passive acoustic receiver, which we typically use, is about $3,000. This particular receiver is about $14,000. And so I can't afford it. and as much as I'd love to have real-time information, we simply don't have the budget for it.
So one's at Newcomb Hollow.
We have Newcomb Hollow and Head of the Meadow. All right, so I want to tell you a little bit more about the individual aspects of these sharks. And so these are heat maps, very simple maps. And what I want you to look for in these maps as we wrap this up is give you a sense of where the individual sharks spend their time. So this is a shark named James, and all I want you to look at is the bright spots, okay? The bright spots are where the shark spends the most of its time. All right, so here's a shark, James, that clearly prefers the Orleans, North Chatham area. If we look at Lumpy, and I don't name these sharks, okay, just so you know. Lumpy is definitely a monomoy shark, all right? Spends the bulk of its season from year to year to year going to this specific area, all right? If we go to Cool Beans, which is somewhat non-selective, we see a shark that moves throughout the Cape region, but seems to avoid, the neighborhood of James and Lumpy to some extent. All right, so this would lead us to believe this is ridiculous variability, introducing a lot of error and variance into the models we're trying to generate relative to the species or to the population. And so when you see this level of individual behavior, it points to social interactions, perhaps territoriality, that is emerging from these long-term data sets. So it's a great way to look at these individuals over time. And of course, another question you all have is, are they always in shallow water? I don't have receivers everywhere. So for this, we've been using this pop-up satellite tag technology, which tells us in 3-dimensional space where the sharks are in the water column. And what we're learning is, and this is a great example, we tagged some of our resident sharks in 2017, and we only put these tags on for about a month. And these tags record the depth and the temperature of the shark. And the shark, for the most part, as you can see, stayed in shallow waters because these tags actually pop off the shark, come to the surface, and transmit those data to a satellite, and we do a retrospective analysis on where that shark was in 3-dimensional space. And so we did this with a number of sharks, and all I want you to see from each of these individuals is that they moved out into depths as great as 50, 75, in some cases 100 meters deep. So they're not spending 100% of their time in shallow water. They're moving out to deep water. And we're trying to look for patterns in those movements to deep water. What dictates when a shark comes inshore versus offshore? So we're getting insights using these various technologies into these behaviors. And how do they go about hunting seals? And this is where a big part of our research has gone this particular year. And to do this, we're using the latest and greatest technology, not that tells us what the sharks do every day, or week, or month, or year, but what they do every second, every minute, every hour. And for this, we're using what are called accelerometer data loggers. And we're also expanding our acoustic receiver array to get a better sense of what these sharks are doing in shallow water. So here's our existing acoustic receiver array as of 2019. We filled in a lot of our blank spots, and we're emphasizing one particular area off of Head of the Meadow where there's a large seal haul out. And that haul out is where we've intensified our number of acoustic receivers to form this grid system so we can triangulate where the sharks are close to shore and actually follow their movement patterns as they move through this area and see how it correlates with differences in depth and oceanographic features like sandbars and shoals and tidal aspects and current. So we're drilling down deeper into what these sharks are doing every minute and every second. And we're using these acceleration data loggers that we're putting on these sharks that not only have the ability to tell us what the shark is doing every second as it moves through the water column in terms of attitude, altitude, pitch, roll, acceleration, speed, tailbeat frequency, but it also has built-in camera system that will videotape what the shark is doing as it moves through the water column so we can correlate these various aspects of its behavior with predatory behavior. And so this is a great paper that was published just this year where researchers in South Africa put these camera tags on white sharks. This is a great image of a white shark accelerating toward the surface toward a seal. And they see that with this yellow line. And as it turns into the orange, it tells you that its tail beat is increasing and it's accelerating in 3 dimensions. And it's a wonderful way to look at predatory behavior and determine when it occurs, where it occurs, how it happens, and how that might be correlated with various environmental aspects, whether it be time of day or tidal cycle or lunar phase, you name it. So just to give you a sense of what we've done so far, and this is all happening this year, all right? All I want you to pull from this really horrible slide is this tells us the depth of the shark every second. This tells us its acceleration in 3 different aspects, in 3-dimensional space, X, Y, and Z, okay? How it's moving and accelerating in 3 aspects. What I want you to see is that when the shark is just casually swimming, you'll see this kind of very basic behavior, not a lot of variability, but where it accelerates is in these particular moments. So what is the shark doing in those moments? We can go back to the video and look at what it's been actually doing. We can pinpoint when predation is occurring, when it's avoiding a boat, when it's swimming near people. You can look at this very, very fine scale behavior. And so I will end with another short video of a white shark, and you get to see from the view of a white shark what it does every second. And what you're going to learn is that the life of a white shark is incredibly boring. The tag is now on the shark. It's mounted to its dorsal fin on a clamp, or it's towed behind the shark using a small intramuscular dart. And this is the view of the white shark as it's swimming through the water column. And what you're going to see is this obnoxious scientist stuffing a GoPro in its face as we're following it, and that would be me, as we're videotaping the shark with this camera system. But over the next 14 hours, we're going to have video that some lovely graduate student will be able to watch and sit and entertain them. This is actually the shark following the boat that we were in as its dorsal fin came out of the water with the tag, and it's going by some sand eels. What's remarkable is they are really boring. They just swim at about 1 to 3 knots all the time, and we have yet to actually see a predation event, but we've beefed up our sample size to now include 5 more fish, which we haven't looked at the data yet because of our time. And we're hoping that we will begin to tease out more than just the shark swimming through, but a day in the life of the white shark. And with that, so I'll gladly ask you to stay tuned, as my friend here will. And I thank a bunch of people who have contributed to our research over the years, various entities, the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy in particular, Save Our Seas Foundation. And there are a few books that I've written and been written about our work that I would gladly advertise at this time. And with that, I will take questions and allow you to leave as needed. But thank you.
So I think we have time for just a few questions. And if there are any young people in the audience, I would encourage you to raise your hands. I'd prefer you to ask the questions. We have our first question over here. And I will just say that this was a great talk, Greg. And I think given the current issues that we're facing here on the Cape and the work you're doing, that annual updates might be in order. So
I'm happy to do that.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I just wanted to find out, can you draw any conclusion from or analogy of the ecosystem after the wolves were introduced into Yellowstone versus the sharks being kind of reintroduced into this ecosystem?
I think it's a great analogy, and we use it quite a bit. I mean, the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone, clearly showed that it was the restoration of a natural equilibrium that was overall better for that ecosystem, right? And a lot of people are coming to me and at me in some cases with regard to, we've got to do something about the seals, we got to do something about the sharks, and it's really hard to ask people to do this, but be patient. Let the sharks do their job. This is played out in the terrestrial environment. It's played out in the marine ecosystem in a few instances. Let the top predator come back and do what it's supposed to do. Let's see how it balances out and then make decisions. And so that's a really good analogy. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Alicia Soderberg. I want to take on the elephant in the room. What about sex?
Try to put that in some context, if you will.
So we haven't talked about mating. Where do they mate? Do they mate here or no?
Great question. I do like the question, and it's something we are trying to tease out of our data, and we have tried to tease it out. And so what we do is we try to tag as many males, females, adults, subadults, juveniles as we possibly can. And then we stratify our data sets and movements and try to see whether the adult males and adult females are together at any certain time of the year and where adult females may go off to, hypothetically pregnant. So of course, nobody really knows where white sharks give birth to their young. No one knows where they actually mate. One of the hypotheses on the table is because you've got a really great scenario on Cape Cod with plenty of food resources, you do have adult males and females. It makes perfect sense that they would take this opportunity to mate. But we don't seem to have we have some evidence of it, but not a lot. So we've been taking tissue samples of our sharks and looking at hormone levels to look at sexual cycles in reproduction to see whether they are sexually active. So far, no picture has emerged, but it's a great question because I do think they're likely mating around Cape Cod because we're seeing scarring patterns on the females, but they're also on the males. So I'm wondering whether, okay, the females are just fighting back. It's a brutal event when males and female sharks mate because the male holds on to the female with his teeth, and fertilization is internal. So it's a brutal act, but nobody's ever seen it ever. And so it's a great question that we don't have an answer to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your enthusiasm. I have two questions. On one of your slides, and the depth of swimming of the sharks, 3 of the patterns were different. They were higher. They were at like 25 to 50 feet instead of down to 75. Have you looked to see whether those 3 are different in age or gender or anything else? And then the second question I had was, do you think there's any difference in the shark behavior when they come towards your receivers, particularly when they're in the grid?
So the answer to the first question is we haven't seen any patterns relative to size. But I think I'm a little worried that our sampling is biased because we are choosing residents which tend to be larger males and females. And so we're trying to broaden our sample to include some juveniles because I think that big animals tend to be more dominant and there are probably patterns associated with that. The second question was relative to depth distribution or?
No, your receivers.
The receivers.
Their behavior is affected by seeing or coming towards the receivers.
Yeah. We don't have any, the only evidence I have that the sharks pay any attention to the sharks are remarkable. I mean, we do spend time just following them sometimes. particularly when there's big schools of menhaden. I'm always wondering whether they're going to eat the menhaden. To me, it's an easy meal. And so we'll follow a big shark and we'll stay back so it doesn't know we're there, and the plane will stay above us. And the shark will come up to the school of menhaden, and sometimes they'll just go around it. Sometimes they'll go under it. Sometimes they'll go through it, and they don't feed on it. And the same thing happens with the receiver. The receiver is passive. It's not generating very little electrical field, if any. But the sharks tend to be curious about things at the surface. So they will come up and check out things that are floating, you know, balloon. They'll go buy a balloon and check it out. A mola, ocean sunfish. But no, we don't see anything that's driven by any kind of pattern nothing unusual with the receivers. You're welcome.
Just like one more question.
Great seminar. Thank you very much. Apex predators tend to feed and engorge themselves and then have long periods of time before they'll feed again. Do you have any data on how often one shark will feed? Because that will it's affecting the population of seals.
That's the perfect question, because that's the one we're trying to answer through the accelerometry and some of this fine-scale tracking. We want to know how often these sharks feed, how often they're successful, and what potential impact it'll have on the seal population. So in this grant that we had funded, it has as much to do with bioenergetics and those behaviors as it does about anything. And so think about how you go about doing that. It's complicated. Frank Carey, way back in 1982, came up with a hypothetical bioenergetics model that said that, you know, a white shark, if it gorges itself, fills its belly on a dead whale, so it just eats blubber, could go for 2 months without feeding. Pete Klimley, you know, many years later said that, well, if it eats a seal, you know, actually Frank Carey said 1 month. Pete Klimley did some similar modeling, you know, perhaps some better estimated parameters for those models, and said, no, you know, if it eats an elephant seal, it can go 2 months. And then Jason Siemens about 4 years ago said, you guys are way off, it goes about 2 weeks. And I say, who cares? For one reason, you know, just because a shark doesn't have to feed once a month, you know, it's going to continue. How often do we have to eat? All right? Yet we seem to find time to do it 3 times a day. And so I think your question is great, and no one has an answer to it. How frequently does a shark feed? Forget how often it has to feed. How often because it's going to bulk up. It's going to do what we do. And that's exactly what's happening. They're not sticking around Cape Cod because they think it's a great place to relax. You know, they're moving into shallow dynamic environments where it's challenging for them from an energetic point of view, only because they're gaining energy and it's profitable. So it's a great question, and I'm hoping in another year I'll come back and be able to answer it. And so thank you very much. I appreciate that. I will stick around if people want to chat, but I don't know. We may get kicked out. Sure.